Marianne,
please.
thank you. See it. Okay. Haifa Abdullah,
Yes.
Linda Boxer, Anne-Marie Dulage, Steve Julesgard,
Here.
Shlomo Melmed. Marianne,
Please.
thank you. See it. Okay. Christine Miskowski, Joe Panetta,
Here.
Al Rolette,
Here.
Michael Stamos,
Here.
Jonathan Thomas,
Here.
Art Torres,
Here.
Christina Vori,
Here.
and we have quorum.
Thank you so much, Maria. Looking forward to a great discussion and opportunity today. I don't have my agenda up, so I believe the next point is to transition to staff for a presentation.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
before we do that, just as we go through the presentation as a point of order, if we have questions, can we ask them along the way, or would you prefer to wait till the end?
What is the committee's pleasure? We have discussed this prior to the meeting today. What is the pleasure of the committee? And Stephen, what's your pleasure?
Well, I kind of like to do things in real time and not wait till the end. So that would be my preference, but I'm happy to do it any way that other people would prefer.
Okay.
I second that on my end.
All right.
I third it.
All right. Having it be thirded, Maria and Pune, my belief and assumption is that you are more than capable of accommodating questions as you go along. So if members of the committee have questions, they'll ask you to pause and ask them in real time. All right. All right. I see a thumbs up from Maria, and Pune is nodding her head. Anything else? All right. Thank you.
So I'm going to get started. I'm Pune Simpson, and I will be presenting the 22-23 fiscal year administration budget. We like to start all of our presentations with our mission, which is accelerating world-class science to deliver transformative regenerative medicine treatments in an equitable manner to a diverse California and world. So I just want to go over the agenda for the day. I will be going over the 21-22 budget, some of the fiscal results and major drivers, then presenting the proposed 22-23 budget and its major drivers. And we have shared with the committee an appendix of department level budget that we can go over. So with regards to the 21-22 fiscal year results and discussion, I first wanted to talk about the context in which this fiscal year has gone. We have completed our first year of the CIRM relaunch after the passage of Prop 14. We've launched the strategic plan, which was approved in December of 2021, and we've ramped up, increasing staff due to the increased workload. In total, in 21-22, we were budgeted for 55 positions. I'm happy to report that 10 of the new positions have been recruited thus far. So we're currently at 47 positions. 3 positions are in hiring process. And aside from that, we've increased in the number of reviews based on our ramp up. We've closed the Oakland headquarters and are in the process of moving to our new headquarters. And finally, COVID still is an effect on our programs. It's affected our personnel recruitment, travel, progress of our funded programs, and related activities such as meetings and advisory panels. I'm happy to take a question.
Yes, so Puna, so just I want the 3 that are in hiring process. So when I try and translate this back into the specific ads that are going on in the appendix, are you including them already in the current FTE counts?
Yes.
So you've already baked those in. And when you say they're in the hiring process, do we have somebody identified that we're going to hire, or we're still searching? Where are we at in that regard?
So we're in different phases of the recruitment process. Some are at the interview stage and screening stage. Some are in the advertisement stage. We are hopeful that we will fill all 3 before the end of this fiscal year, which is why we're counting them towards the positions of this fiscal year. But all the salary savings related to those positions being vacant is being reported as savings.
Right. So you've got them baked into the FTEs, but you don't have the salary baked in. So, right. So the
Correct.
money is not there. Okay. Because I've noticed in some of them, when you start adding people in, there are huge increases in salaries that seem disproportionate to the number of new ads. And so, I assume this is what was going on is you counted them as an FTE, but since you weren't paying them anything, you didn't count any money towards them. So, okay.
That's exactly right. We show the savings of any dollars that we haven't spent this fiscal year, which is actually what I'll be getting into next.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
No, I've got a question for you, please.
Yes.
Do we have anywhere any kind of a summary of what these positions are and what the salaries are?
So we show the increases in the attached. We presented the new increases in the 21-22 January mid-year budget, and they are in the appendices, but as position count.
Yeah, but the positions themselves, do we have that?
We do. They're not identified in detail in the appendices, but we have been advertising them, and yes, we have them.
I'd just like to get, and it doesn't have to be here, but I'd like to get an idea of what the positions are, if possible, please.
I'll be happy to get that to you. Maria?
Oh, sorry. I wanted to just kind of respond to the second part of the question raised about the salary ranges. So CIRM has posted salary ranges for various positions. They're based on levels. And just for this board's information, that is currently undergoing a reevaluation along with a salary survey. And that's something that'll be coming to the board in the upcoming months. But what happens is that the positions that are posted, depending on the position and the level, those are, they are dictated by what the salary levels are on the posted CIRM. It's posted on the CIRM website and it's available. So we can send that over. And again, the department level budgets state kind of the broad category of the new personnel ads in that, but we can speak to that a little bit more if you're interested.
Nay, I have a question related to Joe's question. I want to make sure I appreciate it. Joe, you're asking for not just the department aggregate budget, but the budget detail associated with those budgets and what the assigned cost is per FTE. Is that correct?
Yes, Al, and I would like to really appreciate more what the changes are in terms of the positions and the new ads and what those jobs are, just to get a better idea of that too.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
If I can ask one additional question actually related to all of this. So in the company world, when you're going to hire a new candidate for a particular position, most companies will look at what's happening in the marketplace. And there are statistics available. Radford, for example, is a good example of salaries for different job positions, different job titles, different levels, et cetera, et cetera. So you're tying yourself to wherever you want to, 50th percentile, 60th, 75th, whatever, so that you're using that as a titrating point to figure out what you're going to offer as a starting salary. Do we do something similar? How do we come up with this, with how we offer salaries for the positions for which we're offering them?
Sure, I can jump in on this since HR falls into my sort of remit. So to back up a little bit to address Joe's question, we're actively recruiting 3 positions in our organization. We have a director level position in our therapeutic development. We have a manager level position in our business development, and then we have a position in our grants management organization. And each one is at different stages of the recruiting process. To Steve's point, and as we've talked about in prior board meetings, we're in the process of undergoing a fairly extensive compensation review. The board charged us last year with going back and ensuring that the compensation levels that we publish on our webpage accurately reflect what the market bears at this point in time. We're still in the process of doing that. So Steve, to your point, yes, we do use comparative data. we either compare it to people currently working in those positions in the organization, if there's similar positions in the organization, or we reach out to get new market data for new positions, such as the business development manager position. Because we're still in the process of evaluating all of the market data and it's coming in, and it will be presented to the board in a subsequent board meeting. I don't have those exact ranges in front of us, but those are the various levels that are articulated. So we have one director level position in therapeutics, a manager level position in business development, and then a grants management specialist role in that for which we're recruiting. I hope that answers the questions.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kevin. I just, we got a little bit of an apple and oranges thing going here, simply because, in my view anyway, because there are not any other organizations that are very much like CIRM in the state of California. So trying to figure out, position leveling for salary purposes, I'm sure is a bit of a challenge, and I appreciate, the work that you're putting into to try and figure that out.
Thanks. I think a bit of a challenge is an understatement for the activity that we've been going through for the last several months. And as you know, the enabling propositions of 71 and 14 articulate the basis upon which we need to base our salary decisions and comparators to the universities of California and other private research institutions. So we're still in the process again of gathering the data and establishing our ranges. And we'll be coming forward in a subsequent board meeting with recommended, if there are any recommended adjustment to our compensation levels.
Thank you.
So Kevin, I really haven't, in all the time I've been on the board, I really haven't understood this all that well. I'll apologize. So we can pay competitively relative to the types of organizations you mentioned. We're not constrained by state civil service requirements, right?
Correct. We're exempt from the civil service requirement.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
So I'll just continue with the presentation, and I'm happy to stop again if there's any other questions.
Thanks, and thank you, Panay, for your this I think will be reflective of the kind of conversation that we'll have today that will help the committee in rendering what I believe will be an informed decision. So thanks.
Absolutely. So next I wanted to go over our 21-22 budget versus estimated to finish. And in this chart in column 2, we're showing what the ICOC approved, $22.9 million. In estimating, the agency will be finishing the fiscal year at an estimated $18.2 million, and that's shown in column 3. And in column 4, we show the variance in the different categories for a total of $4.7 million in savings that have been captured. These savings are the result of the team's management of our expenditures and keeping costs down while still growing. Also, some of the expenditures in these categories did not materialize, which I will be talking about shortly. But before I leave this slide, I wanted to point out that there's 3 line items that have the greatest amount of savings in terms of dollars. The first is employee expense with $3 million. Next is external services with $563,000, and finally rent, a savings of $417,000. These 3 categories combined represent 84% or $4 million of the savings that we're capturing. So I'll be focusing on these 3 major drivers, which in the next few slides, which I'm happy to go to next. So in terms of lower expenditures with employee expenses, again, we were under budget by $3 million. This was due to the delay in filling positions. We had an ambitious goal of filling our vacancies. We're proud that we were able to fill 10 and are in the process of filling the remaining 3 for this fiscal year's total of 13 positions. But that timeline that we had took longer, so that resulted in some savings, which we're showing here. Also, we made the decision not to fill 3 positions, which again created some savings that contributed. Those were the major factors for the employee expenses. With regards to external services, we're under budget by $563,000. because of the contingent contracts and external legal services that were not required. So we were capturing those savings because we did not need to use those contracts. And finally, with regards to move expenses, we're under budget by $417,000 because the actual move costs were lower than budgeted due to the staff's diligence in shopping around and getting services related to the move at lower than expected costs. I don't see any hands, so I think I'm going to continue. Please stop me if you have any questions. So I want to talk about the 22-23 proposed budget. The SERM team is requesting that the ICOC approve $26.2 million for the 22-23 budget. In this chart, we show again what the ICOC approved in 21-22, which is $22.9 million in the second column. In the third column, we're showing the proposed budget of 26.2. And in the fourth column, we're showing the variance. Again, I want to draw your attention to three particular line items. Employee expense is an increase of $2.7 million. Reviews, meetings, and workshops is $562,000. And at the very bottom, facilities is a reduction of $201,000. Combined, those are the major factors related to the 3.2 million variance, and that's what I want to focus on next. So with regards to the employee expenses, we're requesting to fund 10 new positions based on programmatic need, the details of which are in the appendices we provided. 3 of those 10 positions we're proposing to fill as partial year, so not a full year cost. We're increasing patient advocate board member per diem. As you recall, the ICOC approved board member per diem in January, but just for 6 months. So this increase represents the full year cost of the per diem. We also have had some increases in mandated benefits and retirement adjustments, which we have no control over. The state mandates those, and some merit salary adjustments. Combined, they are a $2.7 million increase. Yes.
Steve, you're on mute.
This comparison you're making is against a prior year's budget rather than expected to finish, and that slide is the last slide in this deck. So actually, compared to the employee expense line item on the expected to finish this year, the difference between what you're asking for and expected to finish is in the neighborhood of a $5.7 million rather than the $2.7 million. So it's substantially more than that. Let me just ask, of the amount of increase, what percentage of that is for new employee salaries?
1.9 million of it is for the 10 new positions.
And that's of this 2.768, right?
Correct.
So if we translate that that to my 5.7 million, which is the actual direct amount of increase from what will wind up at the end of this year to the end of the next fiscal year, according to this budget. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
What percentage is that in new salaries?
So the 1.9 million versus the 5.7?
Yes. No, it's so what's the where's my slide? Okay. So this year we expect to spend $12.645 million, right?
Yes.
And the new budget is $18.421 million. And the delta between those is 5.716, but just let's say it's 5.7. So that's an increase of $5.7 million. Forget about the old budget. The old budget's just the old budget. It's actually what we spent that I'm more focused on.
Okay.
So of that 5.7, how much is going to new salaries? So that would be the 10 new positions and the 3 positions budgeted at partial year. What's the dollar amount that goes to those?
Okay, so the 10 new positions, the 1.9 million associated with the 10 positions represents 33% of the 5.7 million that you're speaking of. And the 3 positions being filled now, where we captured the savings this fiscal year, but we're budgeting for them for the full 12 months next year, is $771,000. So combined roughly 2.75.
So where does the other $3 million get spent then?
I would be happy to explain that. Thank you for asking that. So there's 4 different areas that contribute to the 3 million in savings. One is that we had vacancies. 3 of them we don't plan to fill at all. And 2, we captured the savings and are not filling. So that's a savings of $848,000. Which 624,000 of that is the abolished positions, which we're not asking for. Again, 771,000 is the 3 positions being filled now. So there's no cost necessarily this year because they'll be filled at the end, towards the end of the year, but full cost next year. Also, there are savings related to the pandemic. We budget for transit reimbursement, which is part of this category of expenditure, which didn't materialize because we were working remotely. We captured those savings. Finally, we captured other savings related to, remember, we hired 10 positions, but we didn't hire them all in July. We're capturing the savings related to those positions. We're capturing savings for contingent costs for temporary help, retired annuitants that we had put in place to help us fill the gap while we were filling those positions. We didn't fully use them, so we're capturing those savings. And finally, we fill positions sometimes lower than budgeted. And the reason for that is we build the budget with a midpoint of the salary range, but sometimes in the recruitment process, we bring them in at the bottom of the salary range, or we assume that the new employee will have one other family member that we will be paying health benefits for two parties in their family. Sometimes they come in and they don't have any other family members, or they waive the health benefits. Those are the kinds of actual numbers that materialize while we're filling these positions that we didn't necessarily know until we filled the positions. So in those 4 factors combined create the $3 million of savings in this category in the current fiscal year. Now, with regards to the 2.7 million that we're asking for in the 22-23 budget, again, 1.9 million of that is related to the 10 new positions. 203,000 of it is related to the full year cost of the patient advocate per diem. We funded half of it this fiscal year, 203,000. The full cost is 406,000. So it includes another 203,000 so that we have the full year cost. We also have some mandated costs that we have no control over. For example, the retirement percentage has gone up, resulting in 210,000 increase in our existing staff's retirement contribution. And then there's some full year costs for the mid-year positions that were approved by the OCOC, and other benefits, changes in benefits and merit increases that are combined in that 2.7. So like you said, it's a combined 5.7, but there are about 6 factors that go into that, aside from the 10 new positions.
So if I understand you correctly, you're basically saying there's about $3 million in the difference that were savings last year that we aren't able to save this year.
Aside from the $624,000 for the 3 positions we abolished, the remaining savings that we're showing in 21-22, we're projecting to be costs. Exactly. We filled those positions. We're going to be paying those salaries, and the temp help adjustments and all that have been made. So we're not going to have those savings in the future.
And what's the average? What's the percentage of average percentage of increase in salary adjustments built into this model?
So we typically build in a certain percentage, like 3%, but that isn't necessarily allocated to any particular position. It's a contingency should there be any approved merit salary increases. If it doesn't materialize, again, we show that as savings.
But I mean, you had to make an assumption about salary increases to build this budget, or you should have anyway, right? you're not holding the salaries constant. So overall, you would have had a dollar amount that goes simply to salary increases.
Yes, we set aside 200,000, roughly 211,000 for salary increases.
211,000 for say 50 some employees, right? Well, 47 plus 3.
It's the 50 employees, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Because the proposed 10 new positions don't get salary increases.
Right. So
If I
that's
can, Steve, if I could just clarify, Panay, Steve's question is, what was the percentage amount, for example, and I don't know this, and so it's a great question for me. Do you budget for increases for the upcoming fiscal year? Is it 2%, 4%? And I assume that that's aside from the state mandated benefit and retirement adjustments that are already here.
That's correct. We budgeted 211,000, representing roughly 5% salary.
5%. That's it. Thank you. And my apologies. I know I jumped into the middle of the line. We're going to get to Christina and Michael when Steve.
no, Al, thank you for clarifying that for me. That helped. The 5%, that's helpful. I'm done.
And I'm happy to take the next question.
Michael was next.
Thanks. Steve asked pretty much what I was going to ask. So thank you, Steve. But I'm still a little confused. So let me ask it a little bit different way, Pune, if you don't mind. When you look, can you go back 2 slides to when you compare the actual to the budget for the current year?
Yes.
I guess it's more than 2 slides. There we go. Perfect. So the, no, one more slide back. When you show the actual to the budget for this current year.
Oh, here.
Right there. That's it. So you're ending the year more or less at 18 and change, right?
Yes.
And so why not, when you build your 22-23, knowing that, why don't you build it based off of that as opposed to based off the budget, which was, didn't end up being realistic, not for any fault of anybody's, except that we saved $4 million plus. So why not build it off makes it much easier to understand from my point of view, if you built it off the actual rather than a budget that ended up being quite inaccurate.
Actually, we do build it off of the actual. The $3 million we captured in savings, we give back, and we build a brand new budget for 22-23 based on our programmatic needs and the costs associated with those needs. We don't really look at the 21-22 budget in building the 22-23. So for example, when we look at the cost of 22-23, there are vacancies that now have been filled. So our budget includes the salaries and benefits for those positions. That's part of what I was explaining, is the savings this year are actually going to be costs next year.
But Pune, your variance then has no logic, because it doesn't make any sense. That's not the actual variance. That's my point, right? So if the variance was actually put on there accurate from the fiscal year 21-22 actual to the 22-23 budget, this is not the slide, but the one you showed later, you had the variance in there, I believe, of 2.7 million. It's actually, like Steve pointed out, it's more like 5.7 million. So I think that's when you explain this current year's budget and you compare it to the previous year's actual, I think it's much easier to follow along how the finances will change. That's all.
Okay.
Michael, when you get to the very last slide in this deck, because that got added in at the end of the day, I don't know if it's in the deck that's being presented or not. It was in the deck that was on the website. You'll see that that happened. Now, the variance didn't get but we added a line in which we showed expected to finish versus the next fiscal year budget, because historically that's the way that these have been presented, and that's the way I understand budgeting better than trying to compare it to a previous year's budget. So
Okay. Thanks, Steve. I'll look at that. Thank you.
Okay, so I think there's one more question, but I don't know
Yes.
which slide.
Christina is next.
Great, thank you. And thank you for all the answers so far. I understand and appreciate the complexities from previous year's budget versus actuals versus what's going to happen. Following up sort of what Steve was saying, and I have to admit that I'm still confused and it's maybe a little bit too detailed, but if I look at any of the slides in the appendix, I'm just picking up one example, medical affairs and policy. there's an increase of essentially 2 headcounts on the employee side for this category, but the expenses as it comes to this fiscal year actuals, 167,000, jumping the budget to 1.5 million. And it's largely in the employee expense category. So it would be, I think, very helpful to have some narrative when there is this type of, not a straight line math change as to what is it that exactly contributes to the change.
Sure, I'll be happy to answer that.
You don't need to answer necessarily this specific thing, but I think this is what sort of creates the confusion, at least at my end.
Understood. Maria?
Maria.
Is it okay for the chair? So may I just repeat back to the board what your request is? The request is in future, in the next budget presentation at the board and for future presentations, that the perhaps a chart that's displayed has the end to finish with the new ask and the variance playing off of the end to finish rather than off of the previous year's budget. So we will make that adjustment because there have been variations in how this has been done in future presentations. And thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay, Panay, back to you.
Okay, so I'm just going to go back to the proposed budget and the factors that were contributing to that. So we talked about the 10 new positions that we're asking for. We're proposing an increase in reviews, meetings, and workshops, and that is primarily due to an increase in the number of meetings, increased costs for honoraria, and more in-person meetings means more travel. So those are the 3 factors that contribute to the cost of increased reviews, meetings, and workshops. Yes.
So Panay, and this actually is also in conjunction with the increased headcount. So you've had to make some assumptions on increases in activity increases. So we're going to have, more reviews, more meetings, more advisory workshops. We need more people. What assumptions are you using that says that we're going to be doing more tomorrow than we're doing today? How do you make that? How do you build that assumption, and how does it come to some number that you can use in terms of increase?
So fundamentally, the budget is built off of our strategic plan. So the stated goals for the strategic plan are then converted to milestones that we need to hit, and then the budget's built on that.
Okay, so it's built on a strategic plan. To what extent, when you look at performance, let's say over the past year, about when you start tracking, number of applications, number of approvals, number of meetings, et cetera, to what extent does actual performance versus what the plan is, what role does that play?
I'm going to let Maria answer that one.
So just to take it down to more concrete terms, maybe when we talk about higher cost of reviews, for instance. So because of there are some additions to the cost of the reviews related to per diem costs for patient advocate members who serve on the board, and higher cost of honoraria for the reviewers just because of the volume and the amount of review material that they need to go through, and the addition of additional things such as data sharing and DEI, for instance. And then the others are quantitative, like board and subcommittee meetings. Maria Bonneville and Marianne can speak to this more, but there are, I think, 70 meetings or something related to all the board-related meetings this year. Is that right, Maria?
There are various, but we have budgeted for 2 in-person board meetings for the next fiscal year, and they're shockingly expensive to have. As are all in-person meetings these days. There will always be a hybrid option. That has contributed to some of this, yes.
There have been, and then there is actually more advisory workshops related to, and those are tangible workshops where we bring in experts related to creation of new concept proposals. Some of you have attended some of them related to manufacturing, related to data and potential shared labs, community care centers, and then the expansion of the alpha clinics. So tangible concepts that lead to multiple stakeholder meetings so that those plans are developed. And so it is related to activities and costs related to deploying those activities, including consultants, including what it costs to assemble those. And then we do know that there are changes from last year to this year in terms of returning to the office, opening up activities, or tangibly more travel. We had no travel at all last year. We've reopened it. People are traveling to meetings. Meetings are opening up. Now that the world is opening up, we need to meet those standards. Otherwise, we'll be disconnected. So those are kind of some of the tangible kind of everyday activities that now have restarted that were not happening over the past couple of years.
Perhaps I should have asked this question a little bit differently, so I apologize. I'm going to focus now instead on headcount. So let's assume we filled the 3 positions that you're currently hiring for. Now you want to add 10 new people. So from my point of view, there's only 2 reasons you would add more people. One is you don't have enough right now. You're doing more work than your current headcount allows for. You've got to lighten up the burden on people. Or the other is you expect that a lot more work is coming in, so 10 over 50 is an increase of 20%, which is a pretty hefty increase in headcount. So, and you can have some of both. So how had you thought about adding those additional headcount? Is it we just don't have enough people on board right now, or we're expecting a real ramp up in activity to the neighborhood of 20%, or is it mix and match?
May I respond to that?
Yes.
Okay. So internally, our budgeting process is an iterative process that includes multiple steps that Pune and her team drive. A component of that is that the leaders of each team, according to what is set forth in front of them in terms of the activities for the year, again, driven by strategic plan and our operational needs, creates a request with a justification that comes to me for review, for the type of position, what the role would be for that position, as well as the workload. And some of it gets us tangible as numbers of these types of awards per heads that usually manages what has been the benchmark to this, what has the increase been this year, given the number of reviews and the number of grants. How many more contracts were there, that are upcoming based on the anticipated review schedule and the yield in terms of applicants, the yield in terms of successful awards that then need to be contracted, and kind of all the downstream activities along the way. So there is that level of justification that comes for me to review. And it goes back and forth, and there's a lot of discussion where I have with one-on-ones with leadership in terms of how their teams are constructed the most optimal way, and so these are an ongoing conversation. And at the very end, we bring the most vetted requests into the budget that gets brought to the finance subcommittee. And then we have another round of discussions with the finance subcommittee who test our assumptions in terms of these type of positions and for what and all that. And then through that, there are another set of discussions that, in terms of, does it look realistic that we'll hire all of these positions, and, another set of negotiations perhaps with internal team to see what they can manage, and could these be delayed by a half a year? Could it be delayed by a year? Do you really need it now? According to that is something that goes on through the several months during the budget preparation. So that, I hope that explains that. So we do have, in some cases, very tangible quantitative justifications, along with, if there are completely new programs that have a demand that wasn't in existence before, then it's the leaders of the team provide a justification for the type of employees or personnel that need to be there to handle this new program.
Is there a headcount ceiling at CIRM? Is there a point at which you get and you can't just plain hire anymore because we're prevented for one reason or another?
85.
And that includes the affordability, access
15,
affordability.
15 for the access and affordability related, access and affordability related activities. So the total head count max is 85.
So this would bring you to 60, and the head count top is 70, generally speaking, for the activities we're in now.
We already have 2 in the Med Affairs and policy, and then there's 2 that is being requested for the upcoming year. So at least 4 of those of the 60 would be in AAWG, not AAWG, access and affordability related costs. And then there may be some access and affordability related personnel that are needed that may not necessarily sit all in the same department, but the majority of them probably would be within that department and definitely related. There would be cross-functional relations between that and other members that are also involved in access and affordability.
Okay, great. When we get to the very end of this and we're at the time of the appendix with all the specific numbers, if you could just point out to me where, besides medical affairs, where the other 2 people reside, where they have something to do with access and affordability.
No, they're all within Med Affairs right now, Steve.
That shows only a head count of 2.
And then there's 2 being asked for the upcoming fiscal year, 2 new heads.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I misread that. Yeah.
I was only talking, so I guess I should have, couched it by saying, so far they're only being budgeted under Med Affairs and policy, but I just wanted to be more.
No, I see.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
JT.
So Pune, in this, the first bullet there, I'm reading advisory workshops as things like the manufacturing workshop or the CNS workshop, or even something like the Scientific Strategic Advisory Panel. Where in here, Maria was referencing members of the team going to conference and staying in touch with the outside world, et cetera, et cetera. And is that included in here? Because it doesn't look like it is. And then the follow-up to that is, what sort of expenses do we assume we're going to have with increased presence in conferences, and what do we plan on spending while we're at the conferences and all that sort of thing?
Okay, so the cost of travel and registration, travel to and registration for conferences is not included in this line item. Those increases were, and I'm happy to go back to where we showed that in terms of the increases. So if you look under travel, we're proposing a budget of $212,000 in 22-23. That is where the travel to conferences is being accounted for. And for the registration and membership to different organizations, that's being requested under membership and training, $234,000.
And thank you. And when at conferences other than registration, what sort of expenses are we anticipating?
So we do plan on using, we have budgeted for outreach dollars at conferences and events.
So what does that mean exactly?
It's part of the our plan to, here, I'll let Maria address that.
So I wanted to distinguish outreach from the outreach and communications plan. So let's take that as a separate, that's budgeted under communication, under public outreach and communications. But in terms of what our scientific team and our team does in these conferences, we either deliver talks, we serve on panels, we have interactions and collaborative meetings. Our scientists get alerted to the most kind of innovative and new science that's on the horizon. They interact with those scientists, and perhaps they try to bring those high quality programs in to perhaps be considered for application and funding by CIRM. We also do things such as have booths at these conferences in the presentation areas, so that members of the scientific community, of the patient community, regardless, depending on what type of conference it is, the stakeholders have an ability to then interact with the CIRM team. We share the progress. We share, opportunities from all of various programs and partnerships. Our business development teams there. The scientists are there to interact in terms of program offerings. Our communications and public outreach team is there related to public outreach and education programs. And then we also even use that opportunity to try to recruit the best talent for some of our programs that we want to bring through. So there are costs associated with that. And we're very, this is something we do at big conferences, including the ISSCR that's coming up, and the ISCT, International Society for Cell Transplant meeting that's coming up. And so those are, included, but really registration is, we're trying to be as cognizant of finances when we have registration. So we're very strategic across the organization in terms of who attends virtual versus who attends in person, and the reason they do. When we can group the membership and group registration so we can have savings with that, we try to do that as a whole organization. So those are the things we do in order to ensure that we're connected with the community, with the scientific community and the community at large.
And thank you. And where on the outreach stuff, where on the budget is that? Like the booth stuff? Where are we? Which line item is that, Pune?
So that's equipment and supplies. If we're buying, a backdrop or a booth stand, those are all equipment and supplies. And in the 22-23, the overall equipment and supplies line item is actually going down.
And these, are we expecting that to be a material expense at these conferences?
Maria?
Should not be. I just wanted to point out marketing. We reuse marketing material that we have in our annual report and our strategic plan and our presentations, and that is in the marketing. That is in the communications budget, the marketing costs.
Did we address your question?
I guess so. I'd like to see more of a breakdown on that, but we don't need to go into that right now.
Maria, did you have anything else you wanted to share? Your hand is still up. Okay. All right. So,
and Maria, if I could, I want to clarify. I understand that every department has its budget, and that you, to quote you, use an iterative process to determine what a department budget should be. However, all the budgets, as I appreciate our strategic plan, are designed to advance the strategic plan, and that you make decisions about personnel plus or minus based on whether or not you've achieved the deliverables as is laid out in the board approved strategic plan. Correct?
Or that we are making sure that we're staffed in order to achieve what's proposed in the strategic plan. So it's both achieving, continue to make sure to deliver on what's achieved in the strategic plan, as well as ensuring that we have the expertise and the resource, the human resources to support the strategic plan.
Yeah, my question is an approach question. The strategic plan drives the budget process. This is what our plan lays out, and consequently, we ask our departments to develop budgets that will achieve those goals. And it sounds like you're saying, okay, good, yes, okay, versus the departments determining a budget and then making sure that it's aligned with the strategic plan. We don't do it the other way. With the strategic plan is driving those budgets.
Oh, yes, definitely. Okay. That's our guiding. And the thing is, there are also there are all these things about making sure that we're positioned to do that. So there's operational infrastructure, requirements in order to achieve that. If we don't have the right IT support, then, these programs will be unable to kind of continue that. So it's both directly related to the strategic plan programs itself, as well as overall operations and as an organization in order to be able to achieve the strategic plan.
Yeah, and also just a process comment that the comments related to budget detail and how we present the information, I'm hoping that that's information is getting captured, so that again for the committee, so that the committee can make the kind of informed decision that it needs to make. And so I'm assuming that that's a yes, but I think we have more questions, so I'll stop asking. I'll stop talking and go back to, I don't know who was up first, but I see multiple hands. I don't see all the
Haifa was up first.
Haifa, okay.
Yeah, I think actually the comment I wanted to make probably was just brought up, which is to make an informed decision, if we can have please more of itemized budget for each one of these items that are listed in the table. And I apologize if I'm asking something that is considered like more obvious, but I think as a new board member, for me to have like a better understanding of this, maybe if we can have each one of these more itemized and broken down.
And Stephen, and then Maria.
I actually want to pick up on what you were asking about, Al. You have to be a little bit careful about hiring to a strategic plan as in and of itself, because a plan is simply that, it's a plan. And you have to also take into account what's going on in real time. So you might have a plan, to have 50 clinical trials next year, that we're going to fund. As an example, I'll just make something up that might seem a little at the fringe. And we wind up only with 20 because we're not in charge of that, right? I mean, this is not like a business where you make the decisions about how many clinical trials you're going to have or not have. We're expecting that based on applications, and we don't really know. And so we have to be, that's why looking at historic data and trends, from my point of view, is an important aspect as well, to kind of see how things are trending along, with the strategic plan, because otherwise you can find yourself hiring a bunch of people, but then things just don't materialize the way that you had hoped that they would in the plan, because you're not totally in control of the plan as you might be in a commercial organization. So I think you've got to do a little bit of both. You've got to say, well, this is our plan, but then you've got to look at the historic trend data and you may have to interpolate between the two. Anyway, that's just my point of view on this whole issue.
Maria?
And Rolla, yeah. So, and the response to that, we don't hire in terms of what we hope will happen, we drive what's happening, and what we do is we sequence it along with where programs are in their maturation. So, for instance, the demand for personnel is driven by the actual, increase in numbers of awards, or the actual increase in number of trials that are in there. So we're hiring consistent with the plan, but we're not hiring ahead of the plan. We're keeping up with what the activity level is related to the plan, if that makes sense. There are some components though, for instance, I'm sorry to interrupt, just as an example, for instance, the AAWG related activities and the creation of a roadmap toward access and affordability is a huge goal we put in the strategic plan as kind of an umbrella goal. In order for that to be achieved, we needed to bring in specific expertise to even sort through and work with AAWG. So we hired a vice president of medical affairs and policy. And then that role, again, was hired consistent with the plan and was a necessary add to even, get started on that component of it. And that was something that was brought to the board for a December, the December ask, because the plan was approved. That was a component of it. We knew that program, we knew things were starting to already happen within that arena in AWG. So we needed a leader internally for that position. And as I mentioned earlier, we actually have some quantitative numbers that support different positions within the organization.
All right.
Art has his hand up.
Oh, Art.
I just wanted to follow up on Maria's explanation for accountability and accessibility. There are 3 pathways that are operating now, which is why it was so necessary to beef up as much as we could realistically in terms of staff. The first of all was the Patient Assistance Fund, which is, I wrote into the initiative with Bob Klein, which many of you voted on to support that we move forward, and we're moving forward with the Department of Finance, and hopefully in time for the May revises for the legislative budget prior to June 15th. That 16 million is going to be integral to us establishing our presence in this field. The second issue is there's legislation already moving through the legislature, which will implement the governor's initiative. He and I have talked about this in terms of his own Office of Accountability, which he's very supportive of our efforts as well. So we wanted to make sure that whatever staff we begin to hire is able to coordinate with the executive branch in respect to what their agenda is and what their goals may be, so that we're consistent, all in respect to the patient. And I think that's an important. So sometimes, Steve, I really respect what you said about strategic plans. Sometimes they don't work out. But in this case, the agenda is so large for this accountability issue because it's not only coming from us, but also with initiatives from the legislature to the chairman of the Assembly Health Committee, Dr. Wood, who represents the wine country. Thank you.
All right. Marie, is that a residual hand? Do you have something else you want to add?
I wanted to just respond to or ask the board about the level of detail. I just wanted to make sure that everybody referred to the department level budgets, because the details in terms of where, what areas these various categories feed into these various categories in this cumulative budget comes from there. Haifa, you'd asked that question. So if you look at departmental level, and then within departments, if there are specific questions, then, we could address that. But I wanted to just make sure that you had that at your disposal. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Back to you, Panay.
So I'll just continue. We talked about the major drivers of the increase. I think we are at this slide with some of the facilities costs in next fiscal year. There's a decrease in move and renovation related costs, and there's a decrease in contingency move contracts for a reduction of 201,000. So that's the major drivers. I would like to just acknowledge that while we actively manage costs and maintain expenses, there are external factors that could affect our projected budget plan. So one of them being the office move, one of them being recruitment and personnel growth, and finally the pandemic and the unknown impact it's going to have in future meetings, travel, and work-related activities. Looks like things are opening up again, so we're anticipating more in-person meetings, but that is a factor that could impact our future budget. And so in summary, the CIRM team is requesting that the ICOC approve the 22-23 fiscal year budget at $26.2 million. And I'm going to end it with this chart, which shows all 3 of the data points that we've been talking about. The approved 21-22 budget, the estimated to finish for 21-22, and then the budget request for 22-23. And I'm happy to take any additional questions on the budget.
I've heard a lot of discussion about additional information that would be necessary in order to make an an informed decision. And so don't want to act like that's not a part of where we are, but wanted to get a sense from the committee about that. And maybe if you have additional questions, you could also include in your questions how you'd like to proceed in terms of this final slide and additional information.
Christina?
I'm certainly fine with the presentation and what is being proposed here. I think my comments at least were simply sort of advice for the future, but I don't have any reason to believe that this is not a very well thought out budget as always.
Thank you, Christina. JT?
So Pune, just want to ask something we've discussed, that the administrative budget has to be sort of seen in the continuum of what CIRM is going to be doing in the years ahead, and is tied inextricably to the research budget, which will be taken up under separate cover. The amount that's budgeted here, are we comfortable that, given how long we plan the research budget to play out, that this number and numbers that will follow in ensuing years, there will be an adequate amount to apportion to administration to cover it, which was an issue that we had as we wound down towards the end of the Prop 71 era?
So we do take that into consideration. We do project out based on the last ICOC approved budget on an annual basis, building in some increases. As it stands now, we have enough funding to carry us for approximately 15 years.
And that's based on the assumption of how long to spend the research budget?
12.
May I just pipe in here? I just want to make sure that these numbers not considered, official numbers. These are just, guesstimates, really. We know that the proposition provides for 10 years. I think we feel very comfortable. So we did a bunch of scenarios, and it looks like that is something that could happen. But I want to make sure that that we are careful about not putting a time here, because there are a lot of things, depending on how the strategic plan rolls out, depending on what the next set of year 5 to 10 strategic plan looks out, and what happens. But we know that based on the construct of the proposition and the proposed research budget that is, built into the proposition, that if we followed that structure, that along with the provided administrative budget to support these activities will carry us through the 10-year period, even with very aggressive activities.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, just this particular slide that's on the screen now is really, for me, the center point of a budget presentation. This lines up with what Michael was talking about much earlier on. It's really looking at what you spent last year and what you're thinking about spending in the next year. It's those, the differences between the two that you look at and try to understand those differences, what's causing them, what's leading to them, looking at the variances, et cetera. Looking at a prior year's budget is, for me, of not much value. That was what you thought you were going to spend, but it's really what you did spend that is, I think, the important starting point. And then you go from there to what you think you're going to spend this year. So I'm just repeating myself, but I would recommend that in future budget presentations that we retain a slide like this, except adding the variances between the past fiscal year and the coming fiscal year.
Duly noted. I think with the nodding of the heads, everybody's got that point. Thank you. Additional questions? Maria, I don't see any additional questions, and that's Maria Bonville who's helping me with this.
Yeah, no, there's no hands raised.
And is there any public comment or questions?
I think we should get a motion on the table,
Oh,
Al.
I'm sorry. My
Oh, it's
apologies.
okay.
It's been a long meeting.
It sure has.
I forgot
So-
we had done that. I think it was a motion by Steve Juleska.
Yeah, I'll move approval, yes.
Sorry. Second by Art. All right. Maria.
Now it's public comment, and
Yeah.
we did have public comment that was submitted via email, and I'm gonna just read that quickly. If I can
Okay.
find it, that'd be helpful. Here we go. The first one, the IT department is set for a 1.3 million budget for equipment and supplies. Specifically, what are the most costly elements in that budget? 2, legal and public outreach both have big external service budgets. What are the most costly elements in those budgets? 3, does CERM anticipate a rebudget come November or December? How much is anticipated for spending on the agency's new affordability and accessibility programs? I think, and these were requested by David Jensen.
Can you just come back and do those one at a time?
I sure can. First one, the IT department is set for a $1.3 million budget for equipment and supplies. Specifically, what are the most costly elements in that budget?
And I'm assuming that Pune and Maria, you will initial foray into answering these questions. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. So for the IT budget, there's 4 factors that are the major drivers. The first is that in the performance audit, there were some things identified, for example, document management and having an electronic system. So that's included. As part of compliance requirements, we've built in some money such as ADA compliance of our publicly facing documents and modifying them to be ADA compliant. There's some operational needs related to the ramp up, which include staff licenses and equipment for the new staff we're requesting. And finally, there's some funds built in for move to the new headquarters. Those are the kind of the big stuff. And then there's the usual, software costs and things like that.
Any additional comments from the members of the committee? How about question 2, Maria?
Legal and public outreach both have big external services budgets. What are the most costly elements in those budgets?
So with regards to the legal contract, this is the amount needed for legal support to supplement the skill set we have in-house for specialty and board-related workload. And just to point out, it's actually what we're asking for is lower than what we had asked for in the past. And in terms of the public outreach, we have several things that are driving this. One is community outreach and a consultant to develop the community outreach and events consistent with the outreach that's stated in the strategic plan. And then the consolidation of all of our contracts related to marketing and website development and design that had been in other cost centers. We're just putting them all in here. So it looks like it's an increase, but really it's just moving them from other cost centers so that they're all showing up under communications.
Any additional comments from members of the committee? All right, the third question, Maria.
Does CERM anticipate a rebudget come November or December?
So at this point, we don't anticipate it. We will reevaluate after the fiscal year started. And if we hadn't budgeted for something that's critical, we will certainly reach out.
I'd like to make a comment about that. I think that given the unique times that we're in, and I notice I didn't say unprecedented, that we've all learned that we've had to at times make adjustments in how we do the work that we do because of that. And so it's a special note. You noted that in your presentation, and I appreciated that COVID has changed how we do our work tremendously. Any other comments?
There's one more question. How much is anticipated for spending on the agency's new affordability and accessibility programs?
So this is a program that formed this year as part of the mid-year budget. So it was partially funded this year. So the 22-23 costs reflect the full year costs of the 2 positions that were built in this year, in addition to 2 additional positions that we are requesting. And There is also some consultant dollars related to workshops and meetings related to the strategic plan and concept development in this cost center. So I think the overall budget is 1.4. Let me just
1.5.
1.5. Yeah, 1.5 million.
Any additional questions or comments from members of the committee? All right. Hearing none. Maria, was there additional public comment or questions?
There's no other public comment.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We've had a thorough discussion today. Maria? Call the roll.
Yes. Haif Abdullah.
Yes.
Steve Julesgaard.
Yes.
Shlomo Melmed. Joe Panetta.
Yes.
Al Rolette.
Yes.
Michael Stamos.
Yes.
Jonathan Thomas.
Yes.
Art Torres.
Aye.
Christina Bori.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries.
I just want to say thank you to Al and to the staff. I know how hard it was to put this effort together, and we're so tremendous challenges. So thank you all.
As your intrepid volunteer, I appreciate that acknowledgement, Art. If I can make a gentleman in Iowa chuckle, one of my favorite places to be in the Midwest, then I'm doing well today. So it's a delight. And I also want to acknowledge that to all of you, I appreciate your thoroughness, your due diligence, and your questions. It is very helpful. Without anything else from the committee, any other additional questions? I don't know. We're a committee. I don't know what the rules are. Do we have to make a motion to adjourn?
No, we can just adjourn.
We are adjourned.
Take care. Thank you.
All right.
Well,
Thank
Thanks,
you all.
everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.